The whistle of the late afternoon train pierced through the Wyoming dust, announcing another arrival to the frontier town of Bitter Creek. It was October 1876, and the air already carried the promise of a harsh winter. The town, nestled along the banks of a temperamental river, thrived on three things: gold prospecting, cattle ranching, and the kind of trouble that followed men who'd lost their way. Eleanor Grace pressed her face against the dirty window of the saloon, watching the newcomers spill onto the platform. At 18, she'd learned that watching was safer than being seen. Her auburn hair, once meticulously braided by her mother's loving hands, now hung in tangled waves down her back. 3 weeks had passed since the train robbery that took everything her parents, her younger brother, and any illusion that the world held kindness for orphaned girls. Get away from that window, girl! Martha Briggs, the saloon owner's wife, grabbed Eleanor's arm with fingers like iron clamps. You got floors to scrub, and Big Jim don't pay you to daydream. Eleanor bit back the response that she wasn't being paid at all. The Briggs had taken her in after the robbery, promising food and shelter in exchange for work. But she'd quickly learned their charity came with chains. Big Jim had made it clear she owed them for their kindness, and that debt grew larger each day. Outside, the autumn sun cast long shadows across Main Street. Cowboys drove their herds through town, kicking up clouds of dust that settled on everything like premature snow. The smell of cattle, sweat, and cheap whiskey permeated the air. This was civilization's ragged edge, where law bent to whoever had the fastest draw and the deepest pockets. Jacob Rourke guided his horse around the chaos, his weathered hat pulled low against the sun. At 32, he moved with the economy of a man who'd learned that unnecessary motion invited unnecessary attention. His spread lay 5 miles upriver, far enough from town to avoid its poison, but close enough to resupply when needed. He'd come for flour, coffee, and ammunition, nothing more. The war had taught him the value of solitude. Shiloh, Antietam. Gettysburg, names that still visited him in the dark hours before dawn. He'd worn Union blue then, followed orders that led to fields carpeted with the dead. Now he wore dust-colored canvas and followed no one's orders but his own. The cattle didn't judge a man's past, and the river didn't ask questions. Rourke. The voice belonged to Samuel Dwyer, standing outside the Brass Ring Saloon with his usual collection of miscreants. The man dealt in everything the law frowned upon: rot-gut whiskey, stolen cattle, and recently, something that made even hardened frontiersmen uneasy. Thought you might be interested in today's special merchandise. Jacob didn't slow his horse. Not interested. Dwyer. Oh, I think you might be. Dwyer's laugh was like rusted nails on wood. Got myself a genuine virgin here, fresh as morning dew, if you catch my meaning. Despite himself, Jacob turned. A crowd had gathered near the saloon's side entrance, the kind of crowd that formed around dog fights and hangings. Through the gaps between bodies, he saw her barely more than a girl, standing on an overturned crate like livestock at auction. Eleanor kept her eyes fixed on the ground. Her hands clenched so tight her knuckles showed white through the dirt. She'd fought when they first brought her out, earned a split lip for her trouble. Now she stood still, knowing that stillness sometimes meant survival. 18 years old. Gentlemen. Big Jim Briggs played auctioneer, his voice booming across the street. Perfect for cooking, cleaning, and whatever else a lonely man might need. Her family's debts are my burden now, but I'm willing to share that burden for the right price. The crowd laughed, an ugly sound that made Jacob's jaw tighten. He'd seen this before in Missouri, where the war's end had left too many desperate people and too few scruples. He told himself to ride on, that this wasn't his fight. His ranch needed tending, and winter wouldn't wait for heroics. Then Eleanor looked up. Her eyes green as spring grass met his across the crowd. In them, he saw not just fear, but a fierce determination to survive. She wasn't broken yet, though God knew they were trying. Something in that defiant gaze reached past his carefully constructed walls, touched a part of him he'd thought the war had killed. $20, someone shouted. 25, another voice added. Jacob dismounted before he could think better of it. The crowd parted as he shouldered through, his hand resting on the Colt at his hip. Men knew his reputation not as a gunslinger, but as someone who'd survived too much to be trifled with. $50, he said quietly. Big Jim's eyes lit up with greed. Now we're talking $50 from Mr. Rourke, do I hear 60? The crowd murmured, but no one challenged the bid. Jacob was known for keeping to himself, paying his debts, and minding his business. If he wanted the girl, most figured he had his reasons, and those reasons were none of theirs. Sold. Big Jim grabbed Eleanor's arm, practically shoving her off the crate. She's all yours, Rourke. Hope she's worth it. Eleanor stumbled, catching herself before she fell. Up close, Jacob could see the bruises on her arms, the hollow look of someone who'd been eating fear instead of food. She flinched when he reached for her, then forced herself still. Can you ride? He asked. She nodded, not trusting her voice. He helped her onto his horse, then swung up behind her. The crowd watched with mixed expressions, amusement, envy, disapproval. Martha Briggs called out something crude that made the men laugh, but Jacob was already turning his horse toward the edge of town. They rode in silence, Eleanor's body rigid as a fence post against him. The river ran alongside the trail, its waters low from the dry summer, exposing rocks like broken teeth. She shivered despite the afternoon warmth, and he wondered when she'd last felt safe enough to be warm. I ain't what they're thinking, he said finally. You'll work the ranch, earn your keep fair and square. When you've saved enough, you're free to go wherever you please. Eleanor turned slightly, studying his profile. His face was weathered but not unkind, marked by lines that spoke of hard living rather than cruelty. Why? She whispered. Jacob kept his eyes on the trail. Man should be able to finish his business in town without watching folks get sold like cattle. It wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth had green eyes and a stubborn chin, had survived something that should have broken her, had looked at him like he might be salvation or damnation, but was willing to risk finding out which. As they rode toward his ranch, the sun began its descent behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. The river gurgled alongside them, indifferent to human suffering, constant in its journey to the sea. Eleanor gradually relaxed, exhaustion overcoming fear, her head drooping despite her best efforts to stay alert. Behind them, Bitter Creek continued its sordid business in the Brass Ring Saloon. Samuel Dwyer counted his money and made his plans. He'd noticed Rourke's purchase, filed it away with all the other useful information he collected. A man with no connections suddenly taking in a young woman that was the kind of weakness that could be exploited. Interesting development, he murmured to one of his associates. Our hermit rancher's gone soft. Miles away, unaware of the wheels already turning against them, Jacob and Eleanor approached the ranch. It wasn't much a cabin, a barn, a corral that needed mending. But the land was good, the water reliable, and the mountains provided a backdrop that sometimes, in the right light, looked like hope. Eleanor slid from the horse on unsteady legs, taking in her new surroundings. Everything was rough-hewn and practical, built by a man who valued function over form, but it was clean, orderly, speaking of someone who took care with what was his. Barn's that way, Jacob pointed. You can sleep in the loft for now. It's warm and dry. Tomorrow we'll figure out the rest. She nodded, started toward the barn, then stopped. My name's Eleanor, Eleanor Grace. Jacob Rourke, he replied, then added awkwardly. There's a stream behind the barn if you want to wash up. I'll bring some supper in a bit. As Eleanor disappeared into the barn, Jacob stood in the gathering dusk, wondering what he'd just done. He'd come to town for supplies and left with a responsibility he hadn't asked for. The smart thing would be to keep his distance, let her work off whatever debt she felt she owed, then send her on her way. But as he unsaddled his horse, he remembered those green eyes, that moment of connection across the ugly crowd. He'd stopped believing in much after the war, but just maybe some things were worth believing in again. The river sang its endless song as darkness fell over the Wyoming frontier. And somewhere in the barn loft, a young woman who'd lost everything dared to hope that tomorrow might be different. And in his cabin, a man who'd chosen solitude over pain wondered if he was strong enough to let another person into his carefully guarded world. Neither knew that their meeting had set in motion events that would test them both, that the coming winter would bring more than cold, and that sometimes the only way to stay warm was to risk the burning. The rooster's crow came too early, pulling Eleanor from dreams of her mother's cornbread and her father's laughter. For a moment, she forgot where she was, then the scratch of hay against her cheek and the smell of horses brought reality crashing back. The barn loft, her new home, was already growing cold as October pressed its fingers through the cracks in the walls. She descended the ladder carefully, her muscles protesting. 3 weeks of scrubbing floors at the saloon had left their mark. But this felt different. This was honest work, not servitude disguised as charity. Through the barn door, she could see Jacob already moving about, checking the horses with practiced efficiency. "Morning," he said without looking up from examining a mare's hoof. "There's coffee on the stove in the house. Help yourself. Then we'll see about getting you settled proper." Eleanor hesitated at the threshold of the cabin. It felt wrong, entering his space without him there. But the promise of coffee won out over propriety. The cabin was sparse but clean, a single room with a stove, a rough table, 2 chairs, and a bed in the corner. No decorations save for a photograph on the mantel, too faded to make out the faces. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, but it was hot and real, not the chicory water Big Jim had grudgingly allowed her. She wrapped her hands around the tin cup, savoring the warmth, when Jacob entered. "We'll need to get you some proper clothes," he said, eyeing her torn dress. "Can't have you working in that. There's a trunk in the barn belonged to the previous owner's wife. Might be something that fits." "I can mend this," Eleanor said quickly. "I don't need—" "You'll need sturdy clothes for ranch work." His tone brooked no argument. "This ain't charity. You can't muck stalls in Sunday dress." She nodded, understanding the distinction. This was practical, not pity. The first lesson came after breakfast, lighting the stove properly. Eleanor had done it before, but Jacob's method was different, more efficient. "Bank it like this at night," he showed her, "and you'll have coals come morning, saves matches." Next came the animals, 5 horses, 2 dozen cattle, a handful of chickens that seemed to have free run of the place. "The bay mare's name is Buttercup," he said, almost embarrassed. "Previous owner named her. The rest just answer to whatever you call them." Eleanor reached out tentatively to stroke Buttercup's nose. The mare whickered softly, and something inside Eleanor unclenched just a little. Animals were simpler than people. They didn't pretend kindness while calculating your worth. "You know horses?" Jacob asked. "Some. My father kept 2 for the farm." The words came out before she could stop them, bringing with them the memory of her father's patient hands teaching her to curry a coat until it shone. Jacob nodded, filing the information away. "Good. You'll be responsible for feeding and watering them each morning. I'll show you how." The day progressed in lessons: how to scatter corn for the chickens without getting pecked, where to find the good water from the stream, how to tell if a cow was ailing. Eleanor tried to absorb it all, terrified of making mistakes, of proving she wasn't worth the $50 he'd spent. When she slipped on a muddy patch near the corral, landing hard on her backside, she expected anger. Instead, Jacob offered a hand up, his mouth twitching in what might have been amusement. "Ground here's tricky after rain," was all he said. Lunch was simple beans, biscuit, a strip of dried beef. They ate in silence on the porch, watching the river flow past. The mountains rose purple and massive in the distance, their peaks already crowned with snow. "It's beautiful," Eleanor said softly. "Gets less beautiful come January," Jacob replied. "Wind comes down from those peaks like the devil's own breath." "Still," she hugged her knees to her chest, "it's free beauty. Nobody owns that view." He glanced at her, something shifting in his expression. "No, I reckon they don't." The afternoon brought harder work. Mucking stalls was back-breaking labor, and Eleanor's soft hands quickly developed blisters. She bit her lip, determined not to complain, but Jacob noticed when she fumbled the pitchfork. "Let me see," he said. She reluctantly showed him her palms, angry red welts already forming. Without a word, he led her to the pump, made her hold her hands under the cold water until they numbed. Then he disappeared into the cabin, returning with a tin of salve and clean strips of cloth. "Should have given you gloves first thing," he muttered, carefully wrapping her hands. "My fault." His touch was gentle, clinical, but Eleanor still found herself holding her breath. When was the last time someone had touched her with care instead of violence? "Thank you," she whispered. He stood abruptly. "Gloves are in the barn, top shelf. Use them tomorrow." That evening, as the sun painted the sky crimson, trouble arrived in the form of 3 riders. Eleanor recognized one from town, Tom Hutchins, who'd bid $20 for her. The other 2 were strangers, but they all had the same hungry look. Jacob emerged from the cabin, rifle cradled casually in his arms. "Hutchins, you boys lost—" "Just paying a neighborly visit." Hutchins grinned, but his eyes were on Eleanor. "Wanted to see how your new purchase was settling in." "She's not a purchase," Jacob said evenly. "She's hired help." "That so?" One of the others, a ferret-faced man with bad teeth, laughed. $50 is steep wages for a ranch hand." Eleanor forced herself to keep working, spreading feed for the chickens, but her hands shook. She knew this dance, had seen it at the saloon, men circling, testing boundaries, looking for weakness. "My business arrangements aren't your concern." Jacob's voice carried an edge now. "You've seen what you came to see. Time to move along." Hutchins leaned forward in his saddle. "Seems unfriendly, you know, Rourke. Man can't even stop by for a chat. Maybe the little lady would like some different company. What do you say? Sweetheart old Jacob treating you right?" Eleanor straightened, meeting Hutchins's gaze squarely. "Mr. Rourke has been nothing but proper, which is more than I can say for some." The ferret-faced man snickered. "She's got spirit. I like that in a woman." Jacob shifted the rifle slightly. "You boys have worn out your welcome." For a moment, the air stretched taut as wire. Then Hutchins laughed, reining his horse around. "No offense meant, Rourke, just being friendly. But you might want to remember, man who keeps to himself too much. People start to wonder what he's hiding." They rode off in a cloud of dust, but Eleanor could feel their eyes on her until they disappeared over the ridge. "They'll be back," she said. "Likely," Jacob agreed. "But this is my land. They know better than to push too hard." Eleanor wasn't so sure. She'd seen how quickly respect could turn to violence when a woman was involved. "I'm causing you trouble." "No." His response was firm. "They're causing trouble. You're just doing your job." He paused, then added, "You handled that well. Not many would have spoken up." "I've had practice," she said bitterly, then caught herself. She wasn't ready to share those stories. Might never be. That night, after a supper of stew and cornbread, Jacob surprised her by bringing out a worn deck of cards. "You play." "My brother taught me poker," she admitted, though Mother never approved. They played by lamplight, using dried beans for stakes. Jacob was better, but Eleanor held her own, bluffing successfully twice. When she won a hand with a pair of 3s, His rare smile transformed his face. "You're dangerous," he said, gathering the cards. "Remind me never to play you for real money." It was the closest they'd come to easy conversation, and Eleanor treasured it even as she climbed to her loft. Her hands throbbed despite the salve. Her back ached, and tomorrow would bring more of the same. But for the first time in weeks, she felt something other than fear or grief. Below, Jacob banked the stove and settled into his chair with a book, but he found himself reading the same page over and over, his mind returning to green eyes and unexpected courage. He'd thought he was rescuing a broken bird, but Eleanor Grace was proving to be made of sterner stuff. The sound of her moving about in the loft, settling in for sleep, was strange, but not unpleasant. For years, the only evening sounds had been wind and cattle, his own breathing in the dark. Now there was another heartbeat under his roof, another soul depending on him. He thought of Hutchins and the others, knew they'd spread their poison in town. Rourke's got himself a young thing. They'd say, "Wonder what she's really doing out there." Let them talk. He'd faced worse than wagging tongues. A coyote howled in the distance, answered by another. The night pressed against the windows, full of its ancient dangers. But inside, for now, there was warmth and safety. Two damaged people learning to exist in the same space, neither quite trusting the peace, but both desperate enough to try. Eleanor lay in her borrowed blankets, staring at the rafters. Her hands hurt, her body ached, and tomorrow would test her again. But she was fed, sheltered, and most importantly, not afraid. Jacob Rourke was a mystery, gruff and distant, but he was not cruel. In this hard land, that might be enough. As sleep finally took her, she thought she heard him moving about below, checking locks, tending the fire, standing guard. She realized, protecting what was his, and for now, that included her. The thought should have been frightening, being someone's responsibility again. Instead, wrapped in hay-scented darkness with the river singing outside, she felt something she'd thought lost forever. Safe. The morning frost came early that year, creeping across the Wyoming landscape like a premonition of the hard winter ahead. Eleanor woke to find her breath misting in the barn loft, the water in her wash basin filmed with ice. 2 weeks had passed since her arrival at the ranch, and her hands had hardened, her body adjusting to the rhythm of frontier life. But this morning was different. Jacob had mentioned needing to check the fence lines along the river, and she'd asked to come along. Might as well learn the boundaries, he'd said after a pause, and she'd taken that for agreement. They rode in companionable silence. Eleanor on Buttercup, who'd taken a liking to her. The mare was steady and patient, perfect for someone still finding their seat. Jacob rode his stallion. Moses, a creature black as midnight with a temperament to match. Only Jacob could handle him without getting bitten or kicked. The river ran lower than usual, autumn's dry spell exposing sandbars and rocky shallows. Cottonwoods lined the banks, their leaves turned gold and rustling like whispered secrets. A red-tailed hawk circled overhead, hunting for unwary mice in the grass. Property line runs along the water, Jacob explained, pointing to wooden stakes driven into the bank. Previous owner was particular about marking it, said water rights would be worth killing for one day. Eleanor nodded, trying to memorize the landmarks. A twisted pine here, a boulder formation there. This land was beginning to feel less foreign, though it would never be the gentle Illinois farms of her childhood. They dismounted near a shallow bend where the river widened, checking the fence posts for damage. Eleanor knelt by the water's edge to fill the canteens, while Jacob examined a section where the wire had come loose. "Probably elk," he muttered, pulling pliers from his saddlebag. "They don't respect property lines much." The morning sun struggled through clouds, providing little warmth. Eleanor's fingers, still tender despite the calluses forming, fumbled with the canteen cap. The metal was cold enough to burn, and when she dropped it into the shallows, She bit back a curse her mother would have scolded her for even knowing. "I'll get it," she said quickly, not wanting to appear incompetent. She reached into the icy water, gasping at the shock of cold that shot up her arm. The current, gentle as it looked, tugged at her sleeve, and she had to brace herself against a rock to keep from losing her balance. That's when she started shivering, not just from cold, but from memory. Another river, another reaching hand, red with blood in moonlight, her brother's voice calling for help that never came. "Eleanor!" Jacob's voice cut through the flashback. He'd abandoned the fence, was suddenly beside her, pulling her back from the water's edge. "What is it?" She couldn't answer through chattering teeth, couldn't explain how the river had transformed into that terrible night. Her whole body shook, violent tremors that had nothing to do with Wyoming's autumn chill. Without hesitation, Jacob pulled off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. When that didn't stop the shaking, he did something that surprised them both. He pulled her against him, his large hands covering hers, sharing his warmth. "Easy," he murmured, the same tone he used with spooked horses. "Just breathe. You're safe." Eleanor's hands were like ice between his palms, but gradually, his steady warmth seeped through. The shaking slowed, then stopped, leaving her embarrassed and drained. She became aware of details, the smell of leather and wood smoke that clung to his shirt, the careful way he held her, protective but not presumptuous. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "The water, it reminded me." She stopped, unable to voice the horror of that night. "No need to explain." His voice was gruff but kind. "We all got things that ambush us sometimes." He released her hands slowly, as if making sure she was steady. The absence of his warmth was almost painful, but Eleanor forced herself to straighten, to reclaim some dignity. "Thank you," she managed. Jacob retrieved the dropped canteen, filled it, all while keeping one eye on her. "Water's got a long memory," he said finally. "Rivers especially. They carry everything downstream, good and bad alike." It was an odd thing to say, but somehow it made sense. Eleanor pulled his coat tighter around herself, watching him work. His movements were sure and economical, but she noticed how his hands trembled slightly, not from cold. "You have memories too," she said, not a question. He paused in his work. "Creeks in Virginia run red for months after Antietam. 23,000 men in one day." He secured the fence wire with sharp twists. "Water remembers blood just fine." They understood each other then. In that quiet way, damaged people recognized their own kind. Both had been baptized in different rivers of loss, both trying to find solid ground again. As they prepared to continue their survey, 3 riders appeared on the opposite bank. Eleanor recognized Samuel Dwyer immediately, his fine clothes and oiled mustache out of place in the wilderness. The 2 men with him looked like hired muscle, hands resting too casually near their guns. "Morning, Rourke," Dwyer called across the water. "Fine day for checking fence lines." Jacob's hand moved to his rifle, still in its saddle scabbard. "Dwyer, you're a long way from your usual haunts." "Business brings me everywhere." Dwyer's eyes found Eleanor, lingered in a way that made her skin crawl. "I see you're enjoying your purchase, though I heard she was supposed to be working, not taking romantic rides by the river." Heat flooded Eleanor's cheeks, but before she could speak, Jacob stepped forward. "The lady's employment is no concern of yours." "Everything in this valley concerns me." Dwyer smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm thinking of buying the Patterson place upstream. We'd be neighbors. Imagine that." The Patterson place had been abandoned for 2 years, ever since the family died of fever. The idea of Dwyer so close made Eleanor's stomach turn. "That land's no good," Jacob said flatly. "Soil's played out, well's gone brackish." "Oh, I'm not interested in farming." Dwyer's smile widened. "I'm thinking of opening a way station, place for travelers to rest. Maybe sample some entertainment. You know how lonely men get out here." The implication was clear. Eleanor felt Jacob tense beside her, saw his jaw clench, but his voice remained level. "Do what you want with your money, Dwyer. Just remember my land, my rules. Anyone crosses this river uninvited will be treated as a trespasser." Unfriendly attitude. Rourke, man might think you had something to hide. Dwyer touched his hat in mock courtesy. "Miss Grace, lovely to see you looking so well cared for, though I wonder what your poor departed parents would think of your current arrangements." Eleanor stepped forward before Jacob could stop her. "My parents taught me to recognize a snake, no matter how fancy his vest. They'd be grateful I'm under the protection of an honorable man, instead of being sold to the highest bidder like you intended." Dwyer's face darkened. "Careful, girl. That pretty mouth might get you in trouble." "If you threaten her again," Jacob said quietly, "we'll have more than words between us." The moment stretched taut, the river gurgling between them like a boundary line drawn in water. "Finally?" Dwyer laughed, an ugly sound that sent birds fleeing from the cottonwoods. "No threats, Rourke, just observations." He wheeled his horse around. "Boys, let's go. The air here's gotten a bit too righteous for my taste." They watched the riders disappear into the tree line. Eleanor realized she was shaking again, but this time from anger rather than memory. "He knows something," she said, "about the train robbery. He was looking at me like he recognized me." Jacob's face was grim. "Maybe. Dwyer's got his fingers in a lot of dirty business." He looked at her carefully. "That why you were on the train, running from something?" Eleanor wanted to tell him everything then, about the masked men who'd stopped the train, how her father had tried to protect the other passengers, how her mother had hidden her and James under seats before the shooting started, how James had tried to be brave at 12 years old, and how his bravery had cost him everything. Instead, she just said, "We were going to California, start a new life after Papa's farm failed. We had everything we owned in 2 trunks. She laughed bitterly. "The robbers didn't even take them. Guess worn clothes and family Bibles aren't worth much." Jacob absorbed this quietly, then began loading their tools. "We should head back. Storm's coming in." Eleanor looked at the sky, surprised to see dark clouds massing over the mountains. She'd been so focused on Dwyer. She hadn't noticed the change in weather. They rode back quickly, racing the storm. The wind picked up, sending tumbleweeds bouncing across their path and whipping Eleanor's hair into her face. Buttercup grew skittish, and Eleanor had to focus all her attention on staying in the saddle. They made it to the barn just as the first fat raindrops began to fall. Jacob helped her dismount, his hand steady on her waist, and for a moment they stood close in the barn's shelter, both breathing hard from the ride. "You did well today," he said. "With Dwyer. I mean, most would have stayed quiet." "Staying quiet never saved anyone," Eleanor replied. "I learned that the hard way." Thunder crashed overhead, and Moses whinnied nervously. They worked together to unsaddle the horses, brush them down, provide fresh hay and water. The storm intensified, rain drumming on the barn roof like ammunition. "You'd better wait it out in the house," Jacob said. "That loft'll leak in weather like this." Eleanor followed him through the driving rain to the cabin. Inside, he built up the fire while she made coffee, their movements coordinated without discussion. The domestic simplicity of it, 2 people creating warmth and comfort against a storm, touched something deep in Eleanor's chest. "Your coat," she remembered, starting to remove it. "Keep it for now," he said, "until you're warm through." She curled into one of the chairs, watching him add wood to the stove. The firelight played across his features, softening the harsh lines, revealing a younger man beneath the weathering. "Why did you really buy me?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Jacob paused, a log still in his hands. "Told you, man shouldn't be sold like—" "No," Eleanor interrupted. There were others being mistreated in that town. You never lifted a finger before. Why me? He set the log in the fire carefully, taking his time before answering. You reminded me of someone. My sister, maybe, though she died young. Or maybe... He trailed off, then met her eyes directly. Maybe I was just tired of walking past things that ought to be stopped. Man can only stomach so much wrong before he's got to act, or admit he's no kind of man at all. The honesty of it, the raw admission, created a different kind of warmth in the room. Eleanor pulled his coat closer, breathing in the scent of leather and safety. I'm glad, she said simply. Whatever the reason, I'm glad. The storm raged outside, but inside the small cabin, peace settled like a blanket. They didn't need more words just then. The fire crackled, the coffee perked, and two wounded souls found a moment's refuge from their memories. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, Dwyer's threats, the coming winter, the weight of secrets still unspoken. But for now, there was this warmth, shelter, and the first fragile bonds of trust stretching between them like spider silk, delicate but surprisingly strong. The first snow came early that November, dusting the ranch like flour from a torn sack. Eleanor had been at the ranch for nearly a month now, and the rhythm of the place had become her rhythm. Early mornings with the horses, afternoons mending fence or tending the vegetable garden she'd coaxed from the hard ground, evenings by the fire with Jacob's quiet presence across the room. But peace in the Wyoming Territory was always temporary, a held breath between storms. The troubles started on a market day in town. Jacob had finally agreed to let Eleanor accompany him for supplies, though his reluctance was obvious. Stay close, he'd warned. And if there's any trouble, you get back to the wagon. Bitter Creek looked different under gray skies, meaner somehow. The mud was deeper, the faces harder, and Eleanor felt eyes following her from the moment they arrived. Word had spread about her living at the Rourke Ranch, and speculation had grown like a cancer. At Henderson's general store, Mrs. Henderson served them with pursed lips and clipped words. When Eleanor reached for a bolt of practical flannel, she needed a warmer dress for winter. The woman slapped her hand away. We don't serve your kind here. Mrs. Henderson announced loudly enough for other customers to hear. Decent folks don't want to touch goods that a fallen woman's handled. Heat flooded Eleanor's face. I'm not... We all know what you are, Missy. Living out there with no chaperone, no marriage certificate. Shameful is what it is. Jacob stepped forward from where he'd been examining tools. His presence filled the space like a thundercloud. The lady's making purchases. You'll show her the same respect you show any customer. Or what? Rourke. This came from the doorway where Samuel Dwyer lounged, picking his teeth with a gold toothpick. You'll shoot up my friend's store, add murder to your other sins. A crowd was gathering, the kind that formed when blood was in the air. Eleanor recognized some faces from that awful day on the auction block. They wore the same hungry expressions now. Come now, Rourke, Dwyer continued, sauntering closer. We're all men of the world here. No need to pretend the girl's anything more than what she is. Though I'll admit, you've kept her looking fresher than most. Must be that ranch air. Jacob's hand twitched toward his gun, but Eleanor caught his arm. Please, she whispered. Let's just go. Listen to your woman. Rourke, someone called out. She knows her place. But Dwyer wasn't finished. He pulled out a piece of paper, waved it theatrically. Funny thing, though, I've been doing some checking. Train robbery last month. Family named Grace all killed, except... He pretended to study the paper. Seems there was a daughter unaccounted for. Eleanor, aged 18, red hair, green eyes. Sound familiar. Eleanor's blood turned to ice. How had he found out? How had he connected her to... Now why? Dwyer continued. Would a sweet young thing lie about her family being dead? Unless maybe she had something to do with that robbery. Pretty girl like that could have been working with the gang, distracting the guards, and... "You're a liar," Eleanor said, her voice shaking. "My family was murdered by those animals. I barely escaped with my life." "So you say." Dwyer smiled. "But who can verify that convenient? All the witnesses being dead. Except maybe some of those robbers are still around. Maybe they'd remember if a certain young lady was more involved than she claims." Jacob moved then, faster than Eleanor had ever seen him move. His fist connected with Dwyer's jaw, sending the man sprawling into a display of canned goods. The store erupted in shouts and scrambling bodies. "Jacob, no!" Eleanor tried to pull him back, but he shook her off, advancing on Dwyer. "You want to spread poison, you face the consequences." Jacob growled. Dwyer wiped blood from his mouth, his eyes glittering with satisfaction. "There's the war hero. There's the killer we all know is hiding under that righteous act." He got to his feet slowly. "Hit me again, Rourke. Show everyone what you really are." "He's what you'll never be." Eleanor stepped between them, her fear transforming into fury. "A decent man. And yes, I survived that robbery. I hid under the seats while they shot my parents. Held my brother's hand while he died. If that makes me suspicious in your twisted mind, so be it." She turned to face the crowd. "You all want to think the worst of me because it's easier than admitting you stood by while I was being sold like cattle. You need me to be worthless so you can sleep at night. But I know what I am. And more importantly, I know what he is." She gestured to Jacob. "The only man in this town with honor enough to act..." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Dwyer laughed, slow and mocking. "Beautiful speech, almost believable. But I wonder, what would people think if they knew about the other survivors from that train? The ones who saw a red-headed girl talking awful friendly with the gang leader before the shooting started?" Eleanor felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "What other survivors? Everyone in our car was killed. Were they?" Dwyer's smile was sharp as a blade. "Maybe you should ask your protector about the drunk he's been hiding at his line shack. Poor fellow's been drowning his memories in whiskey, babbling about green-eyed angels and devils looking just the same." Jacob's face had gone pale. "Lester saw the robbery. Old Lester saw a lot of things before you tucked him away." Dwyer straightened his vest. "Question is, what else did he see? What else is he saying when the whiskey loosens his tongue?" Eleanor's mind raced. Another survivor. Someone who might have seen what really happened, but why would Jacob hide him, unless... "We're leaving," Jacob said abruptly. He grabbed Eleanor's arm, steering her toward the door. "Send my order out to the ranch, Henderson. I'll pay double for delivery." They pushed through the crowd, ignoring the mutters and stares. Eleanor's legs felt wooden, her thoughts scattered like startled birds. "In the wagon." Jacob snapped the reins harder than necessary, sending the horses into a quick trot. They were a mile out of town before Eleanor found her voice. "Who's Lester?" Jacob's jaw worked silently for a moment. "Old cowhand. Worked for me until the drink got too bad. I let him use the line shack up in the hills. Check on him every few weeks." "And he was on the train?" "Never said so. Just showed up at the ranch 2 days after the robbery, shaking like a leaf, begging for work and whiskey." Jacob glanced at her. "I didn't connect it until now." Eleanor wrapped her arms around herself. "Dwyer's going to use him. Twist whatever he saw into something ugly." "Maybe. Or maybe Lester saw exactly what happened, that you're innocent. Or maybe he saw me frozen with fear and thinks I was part of it." The possibility made her sick. In the chaos and terror, who knew what things had looked like to a terrified passenger? They rode in tense silence until the ranch came into view. As they pulled up to the barn, Jacob finally spoke. "I need to find Lester before Dwyer does." "I'm coming with you." "No." His tone was final. "If Dwyer's planning something, I want you here where it's safe." "Safe?" Eleanor laughed bitterly. "When has anywhere been safe for me?" Jacob turned to her then, his eyes fierce. "This ranch is safe. I've made it safe. And you'll stay here while I sort this out." The command in his voice should have angered her. Instead, she heard the fear underneath it. Fear for her. Not of her, despite everything Dwyer had implied. Jacob still believed in her innocence. "All right," she said quietly. "But hurry back." He nodded, already unhitching the horses to saddle Moses. Eleanor watched him prepare, noting the extra ammunition he packed, the grim set of his shoulders. This wasn't just about finding Lester anymore. Lines had been drawn in town today, sides chosen. As Jacob mounted up, he paused, looking down at her. "Whatever Lester says, whatever anyone says, I know you're not what Dwyer's suggesting." "How can you be so sure?" A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Because I've seen what guilt looks like. Carried it myself for years. You're carrying grief, not guilt. There's a difference." Then he was gone, Moses's hoofbeats fading into the gathering dusk. Eleanor stood in the empty yard, the weight of the day settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. Somewhere in the hills, a drunk old cowhand held her fate in his whiskey-shaken hands. In town, Dwyer was probably already spinning his web, turning suspicion into certainty, gossip into gospel. She did the only thing she could. She worked, fed the horses, gathered eggs, started to stew for when Jacob returned, but her hands shook as she chopped vegetables. And more than once she found herself at the window, scanning the horizon for riders. The sun set blood red behind the mountains. And still Jacob didn't return. Eleanor lit the lamps, tended the fire, tried not to imagine all the things that could go wrong. What if Dwyer had gotten to Lester first? What if Jacob rode into an ambush? When full dark fell, she retrieved the shotgun from above the door, loaded it with steady hands. If trouble came calling, it wouldn't find her helpless. Not again. She must have dozed in the chair, because she woke to the sound of horses, multiple horses approaching fast. Eleanor grabbed the shotgun, heart pounding, and positioned herself by the window. But it was Jacob's voice that called out, "Eleanor, it's me! I've got Lester!" She flew out the door to see Jacob supporting a shabby figure on a sway-backed mare. Lester was barely conscious, reeking of whiskey and worse, mumbling incoherently. "Help me get him inside." Jacob said, "He's in bad shape." Together they maneuvered the old cowhand into the cabin, laying him on the floor near the fire. In the lamplight, Eleanor could see he'd been beaten, one eye swollen shut, lip split, bruises darkening on his weathered face. "Dwyer," she asked. "His men found them working Lester over at the shack." Jacob's knuckles were bloody. He'd clearly given as good as he got. "They wanted him to say he saw you with the robbers. When he wouldn't, they tried to beat it into him." Eleanor knelt beside Lester, using a damp cloth to clean his wounds. The old man's eyes flickered open, focused on her face with difficulty. "Angel," he croaked, "saw you on the train, praying over that boy, your brother." Tears stung Eleanor's eyes. "Yes, James." "Tried to help," Lester continued. "After the shooting, but you were already helping others. Saw you, binding wounds, giving water." He coughed, specks of blood on his lips. "No outlaw. You, just a brave little girl in hell." The relief was overwhelming. Eleanor bowed her head, tears flowing freely. Jacob's hand settled on her shoulder, warm and steady. "Will you tell others?" Jacob asked Lester. "Tell them what you really saw." The old man tried to nod, winced. "If I live through this, Dwyer, he's planning something. Heard them talking, something about tomorrow night." But whatever else he might have said was lost as unconsciousness took him again. Jacob and Eleanor exchanged worried glances. Tomorrow night. What was Dwyer planning? They made Lester as comfortable as possible, taking turns watching over him through the night. As dawn broke gray and uncertain, Eleanor knew that whatever came next, at least one person could speak the truth about that terrible day on the train. Whether anyone would listen, whether truth even mattered in a place ruled by men like Dwyer, remained to be seen. The smell of smoke woke Eleanor from restless sleep. For a moment, she thought it was the stove, but the acrid scent was wrong. This was the smell of destruction, not warmth. She bolted upright in the loft to see an orange glow dancing on the barn walls. "Fire!" she screamed, scrambling down the ladder. "Jacob, the barn's on fire!" Jacob was already moving, having smelled it too. He burst out of the cabin, Eleanor right behind him. The sight that greeted them was a nightmare. The entire east wall of the barn was engulfed in flames, and the horses were screaming in terror. "Get the water buckets," Jacob shouted, running toward the barn. "I'll get the horses." Eleanor raced to the pump, her bare feet slipping on the frost-covered ground. Her hands shook as she worked the handle, filling bucket after bucket. The fire was spreading fast, too fast to be natural. This was Dwyer's promised violence, delivered under cover of darkness. Jacob had thrown open the barn doors and was trying to lead the panicked horses out. Moses came first, eyes rolling white with fear, followed by Buttercup. But 3 horses remained, and the smoke was getting thicker. "Stay back," Jacob ordered when Eleanor approached with water. Like hell, she darted past him into the smoke-filled barn. The heat hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath. Through burning eyes, she saw the remaining horses huddled in the far corner, too terrified to move toward the flames blocking their exit. Eleanor grabbed a blanket from a stall, dunked it in a water trough, and threw it over her head and shoulders. "Easy, easy," she crooned, approaching the horses slowly despite every instinct screaming at her to run. "Come on, beauties, trust me." Behind her, she could hear Jacob fighting the flames, trying to create a path. The roof beams groaned ominously, raining down, burning debris. Eleanor reached the first horse, a young gelding named Scout, and grabbed his halter. "That's it. Come on," she urged, pulling steadily. The horse resisted, then suddenly bolted forward, nearly trampling her in his desperation to escape. Eleanor pressed herself against the wall as he thundered past, then turned back for the others. "Eleanor, get out!" Jacob's voice was raw from smoke. "The roof's going." She ignored him, focusing on the remaining 2 horses. One was an old mare named Delilah, the other a spirited stallion called Rusty. Neither would budge, paralyzed by fear. Then she remembered something her father had taught her. Horses would often follow if they couldn't see the danger. Eleanor ripped strips from her wet blanket, fashioning makeshift blindfolds. Her lungs burned with each breath, and black spots danced in her vision. But she managed to cover Delilah's eyes. "Now or never," she gasped, pulling the mare forward, blindfolded. Delilah followed, and Rusty, not wanting to be left alone, came too. They burst out of the barn just as a section of roof collapsed behind them. Jacob caught Eleanor as she stumbled, both of them coughing violently. The horses scattered across the yard, but they were alive. "You fool woman," Jacob rasped, but his arms tightened around her. "You beautiful, brave fool." There was no time for relief. The fire was spreading to the feed shed, and if it reached the cabin, they'd lose everything. They worked side by side, Jacob attacking the flames, while Eleanor pumped water until her arms screamed in protest. Other hands joined theirs. Lester, despite his injuries, had dragged himself outside to help. They fought the fire for what felt like hours, but was probably less than one. Finally, with the barn reduced to smoldering ruins, but the other buildings saved, they collapsed on the frozen ground, exhausted. That's when Eleanor saw them riders on the ridge, silhouetted against the lightening sky. Too far to identify, but she knew who they were. Dwyer's men, come to watch their handiwork. "Bastards!" Jacob snarled, following her gaze. He struggled to his feet, reaching for his rifle, but the riders were already disappearing over the hill. As dawn broke fully, the devastation became clear. The barn was gone, along with their winter feed supply, tack, and tools. The horses huddled together in the corral, traumatized but miraculously unharmed. The acrid smell of smoke permeated everything.
"This is my fault,"
Eleanor said hollowly.
"They did this because of me."
"They did this because they're cowards and thieves," Jacob corrected firmly. "This isn't on you." But Eleanor saw the truth in his eyes. Things had escalated beyond mere harassment. Dwyer meant to drive them out or see them dead. By mid-morning, unexpected help arrived. Tom Hutchins, the man who'd bid on Eleanor at the auction, rode up with 2 other ranchers. Eleanor tensed, expecting more trouble, but Hutchins raised his hands peacefully. "Saw the smoke from my place," he said, surveying the damage. "This ain't right. Rourke, whatever else is between us, burning a man out ain't the way." The other ranchers nodded agreement. One of them, an older man named Josiah Wells, spat tobacco juice and declared, "Dwyer's gone too far. Bad enough he runs his schemes in town, but attacking honest ranchers, that threatens us all." Eleanor watched, amazed, as the men organized a work party. Within hours, neighbors she'd thought were enemies were helping clear debris and salvage what they could. Women arrived with food and supplies, though most still avoided meeting Eleanor's eyes directly. Mrs. Wells, a sturdy woman with kind eyes, handed Eleanor a basket of biscuits.
"Child,
"I don't hold with how you came to be here," she said quietly.
but I saw how you ran into that fire for those horses. That took courage.
Maybe we've been too quick to judge." The small kindness brought tears to Eleanor's eyes.
"Thank you,"
she whispered. As the day wore on, Jacob's shoulder began to pain him, an old war wound aggravated by the night's exertions. Eleanor noticed him favoring it, trying to hide the discomfort. "Sit," she ordered, pointing to a stump. "Let me look." "I'm fine," he protested, but she was already unbuttoning his shirt to examine the shoulder. The wound had reopened, probably from when he'd hefted burning beams. Blood seeped through the bandage he'd roughly applied. Eleanor sucked in a breath at the network of scars covering his chest and back, evidence of battles survived, pain endured. "This needs proper tending," she said. Despite the people around them, she couldn't help the gentleness in her touch as she cleaned and rewrapped the wound. Jacob sat still under her ministrations, his eyes never leaving her face.
"There,"
she said finally.
"Try not to tear it open again."
"Yes, ma'am," he replied, a hint of smile in his voice. That evening, after the neighbors had gone, they stood surveying their damaged ranch. The barn skeleton stood stark against the sunset, a monument to violence. But the cabin remained. The horses were safe. And they had each other. "We'll rebuild," Jacob said. "Insurance money from the barn, plus what I've saved. We'll make it better than before."
Eleanor looked at him. "You still want me here after all this trouble?"
Jacob turned to her, his face serious in the fading light. "This ranch has been half dead since I bought it, just like me, going through the motions, surviving but not living. Then you came along, and suddenly there were flowers in the garden and laughter at the supper table. The horses are gentler, the work seems lighter, and for the first time in years, I care what tomorrow brings." He took her hand, calloused fingers gentle on hers. "So yes, Eleanor Grace, I want you here, if you'll stay." Eleanor thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, from the blood-soaked train car to the auction block to this half-burned ranch, with a man who saw her worth when the world saw only shame. Her family was gone, her old life destroyed, but here in this harsh land, she'd found something she hadn't dared hope for a future. "I'll stay," she said simply. "This is home now." Jacob squeezed her hand, and they stood together watching the stars emerge in the Wyoming sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Dwyer wouldn't stop with one fire. and winter was coming fast. But tonight, they had this moment of peace, this promise of partnership. In the cabin, Lester slept fitfully, mumbling about trains and angels. His testimony might help clear Eleanor's name, or it might not matter at all in a place where might made right, but at least the truth existed, had been spoken aloud. As Eleanor prepared their simple supper, she caught Jacob watching her with an expression she'd never seen before, something soft and wondering, like a man seeing sunlight after years underground. "What?" she asked. "Nothing," he said, "just thinking how different this place feels with you in it." She ducked her head to hide her blush, busying herself with the dishes, but warmth spread through her chest, a feeling that had nothing to do with the stove's heat. Outside, coyotes howled in the distance, and the wind whispered threats of snow. Their barn was gone, their enemies were gathering, and the future was uncertain. But inside the small cabin, two people were building something stronger than buildings, more valuable than gold. They were building trust, partnership, and maybe, though neither was ready to name it yet, love. The fever came 3 days after the fire, hitting Jacob like a freight train. Eleanor found him collapsed by the well, his skin burning hot despite the November cold. The reopened wound had become infected, red streaks spreading across his shoulder like poisonous vines. "Stubborn fool," she muttered, half dragging him to the cabin. "Should have rested like I told you." For 3 days and nights, Eleanor barely left his side. She bathed his fever with cool cloths, forced willow bark tea between his lips, and changed his bandages with hands that trembled not from inexperience, but from fear. In his delirium, Jacob called out names, soldiers from his unit. She guessed, and once, heartbreakingly, for his mother. "Don't you dare die on me, Jacob Rourke," she whispered during the darkest hour of the second night. "You hear me? I won't let you." Lester helped as much as his battered body allowed, keeping the stove fed and the horses tended. "He's strong," the old cowhand assured her. Seen him survive worse than this. But Eleanor wasn't so sure. Jacob's breathing grew labored, his skin taking on a grayish pallor that terrified her. She'd already lost everyone she loved. The thought of losing him too was unbearable. On the third night, with snow falling softly outside, Eleanor did something she hadn't done since the train robbery. She prayed, not the formal prayers of her childhood, but raw, desperate pleas to whatever power might be listening. "Please," she whispered, holding Jacob's hand between both of hers. "He's a good man, the only truly good man I've found in this God-forsaken place. Don't take him. Take me instead if you must, but don't take him." Whether from divine intervention or sheer stubborn will, Jacob's fever broke just before dawn. His eyes opened, focused and clear for the first time in days. "Eleanor," his voice was hoarse, weak but lucid. "I'm here." Tears she'd held back for days finally spilled over. "You're going to be all right." He squeezed her hand weakly. "The horses." She laughed through her tears. "Of course that's what you ask about. They're fine. Everything's fine now." Jacob's recovery was slow but steady. Eleanor insisted he stay in bed, threatening to tie him down if necessary. She took over the ranch work with surprising efficiency, having learned well in her months there. The neighboring ranchers, their attitudes softened by the fire, sent their hands to help with the heavier tasks. One afternoon, while Jacob dozed, Eleanor sat by his bed mending one of his shirts, the domestic intimacy of it caring for his clothes, his home. Him filled her with a warmth she'd never experienced. This wasn't the girlish romance she'd dreamed of back in Illinois. This was deeper, built on shared struggles and mutual respect. "You're thinking too loud," Jacob said, startling her. "I thought you were asleep." "Hard to sleep with you fretting." He studied her face. "What's troubling you?" Eleanor set down her sewing. "I was thinking about my mother, how she used to mend Father's shirts just like this. They'd been married 20 years, And she still smiled every time she folded his clothes. She paused. I used to think it was foolish, finding joy in such simple things. Now I understand. Jacob reached for her hand. Eleanor, He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. I'm not good at pretty speeches, never have been, but these past days, lying here, all I could think was how I hadn't told you, hadn't said. You don't have to say anything, Eleanor interrupted, suddenly shy. Yes, I do. His grip on her hand tightened. I love you. Eleanor Grace. Not sure when it happened. Maybe that first day when you looked at me across that ugly crowd. Maybe when you ran into a burning barn for the horses. Or maybe it was all the quiet moments in between. But I love you, and I should have said so before. Eleanor's heart raced. I love you too, she whispered, despite trying very hard not to. Why fight it? Because everyone I've ever loved has been taken from me. I thought if I didn't name it, didn't acknowledge it, maybe I could keep you safe. Jacob pulled her closer until she was sitting on the edge of the bed. We don't get to choose safety in this life. We only get to choose whether we face the dangers alone or together. Eleanor leaned down and kissed him then, soft and careful of his injury, but full of promise. When they parted, both were breathless. When I'm healed, Jacob said, I want to do this proper, marry you, if you'll have me, give you the protection of my name. Make it clear to everyone that you're not some purchased woman, but my wife. Is that a proposal, Mr. Rourke? A promise of one, when I can get down on one knee without falling over. Eleanor laughed, the sound bright in the small cabin. Then I promised to say yes. Their moment of happiness was interrupted by Lester's urgent voice from outside. Riders coming. Looks like Dwyer and a whole passel of men. Eleanor grabbed the shotgun, her happiness evaporating. Stay in bed, she ordered Jacob. Like hell. He struggled to sit up, reaching for his gun belt. You can barely stand. Then I'll sit in a chair with a rifle, but I won't let you face them alone. There was no time to argue. Eleanor helped him to a chair by the window, rifle across his lap, then positioned herself by the door. Through the window, she could see them coming, Dwyer leading 8 men, all armed. They stopped just outside rifle range. Dwyer rode forward alone, hands visible but his coat open for easy access to his weapons. Morning, folks, he called out cheerfully. Heard Rourke was feeling poorly. Thought I'd check on my neighbors. State your business and go. Eleanor responded through the cracked door. Now, is that any way to greet visitors? Dwyer dismounted, approaching slowly. I come with a proposition, a generous one. We're not interested. You haven't heard it yet. Dwyer stopped about 20 feet from the cabin. I'll buy this ranch. Pay twice what it's worth. Cash money. You and Rourke can go anywhere. Start fresh where nobody knows your, history. No, Jacob called out. Dwyer's friendly mask slipped. That's pride talking. Rourke, pride's expensive out here. Ask your barn. He paused. Accidents happen, especially to folks who don't have friends. Now me, I have lots of friends. Some of them get impatient, hard to control. But if you sold to me, well, I'd make sure nothing unfortunate happened. You threatening us? Eleanor stepped onto the porch, shotgun visible. Offering protection, Dwyer corrected. See, word's gotten out about your testimony. Lester, about what you claim you saw on that train. Some folks, not me, of course, but some folks think you might be confused, might remember things different if properly encouraged. From inside, Lester's voice rang out strong. I know what I saw. That girl's innocent as a newborn lamb. Dwyer's smile was cold. Touching loyalty. But loyalty doesn't stop bullets or fires or any number of unfortunate accidents that can befall isolated ranches. He looked directly at Eleanor. You've lost one family already. Miss Grace, Do you really want to lose another? The threat hung in the air like smoke. Eleanor felt Jacob tense behind her, knew he was calculating whether he could get a shot off from his position. But they were outnumbered, outgunned, and he was in no condition to fight. "Get off my land, Dwyer," Jacob managed to growl. "Now. Think about my offer." Dwyer said, remounting, "I'm a patient man, but my friends aren't. Winter's coming, long, cold nights, lots of time for accidents." They watched the riders disappear over the ridge. Eleanor's hands shook as she lowered the shotgun. "He means it," she said quietly. "He'll keep coming until we stop him." Jacob finished. "Help me up." "You need to rest." "I need to think, and I can't think lying down like an invalid." Eleanor helped him to the table, where he sat heavily, face gray with pain and exhaustion. "We need allies," he said. "Hutchins and Wells might help, but they won't go against Dwyer directly, not without proof of his crimes." "What kind of proof?" Jacob was quiet for a long moment. "The train robbery. You said Dwyer knew details, acted like he had inside knowledge. What if he was involved? What if that's why he's so keen to silence witnesses?" Eleanor's blood ran cold. "You think he planned it?" "Makes sense. He deals in stolen goods, has connections with outlaws. A train full of settlers heading west with all their possessions. That's a tempting target." "But how do we prove it?" "Lester," Jacob said slowly, "you were delirious the other night. Kept talking about seeing someone you recognized with the robbers. Someone from town." The old cowhand's face went pale. I thought I dreamed that part. But there was a man. Stayed back, giving orders. Wore a bandana over his face. But something about him. Think, Lester, this is important." Lester closed his eyes, concentrating. "The way he sat his horse, and a gold ring with a red stone, caught the light when he pointed. His eyes flew open. Dwyer wears a ring like that." Eleanor felt pieces clicking together. "That's why he's so desperate to discredit us. If we can prove he was behind the robbery." "He hangs," Jacob finished. "But proving it won't be easy. We need more than Lester's word against his." They spent the rest of the day planning, Jacob fighting through his weakness to think strategically. They would need evidence, allies, and most importantly, a way to protect themselves until they could act. That night, as Eleanor helped Jacob back to bed, he caught her hand. "I meant what I said earlier. About marriage. This doesn't change that." "I know." She kissed his forehead. "But let's survive Dwyer first. Then we can worry about the future." Jacob pulled her down for a proper kiss. "We will survive. We've come too far to let a snake like Dwyer win." Eleanor curled up in the chair beside his bed, unwilling to leave him even to sleep in her loft. Outside, snow began to fall in earnest, the first real storm of winter. She thought about Dwyer's threats, about the long, cold nights ahead, about all they stood to lose. But she also thought about Jacob's declaration of love, about the promise of marriage, about the life they were building together. Love and danger, hope and fear all tangled together like the Wyoming winds. "We'll win," she whispered into the darkness. "We have to." Because now she had something worth fighting for again. Not just survival, but a future, a home, a love that had grown from the ashes of tragedy. And she'd be damned if she'd let Samuel Dwyer take that away. The day of reckoning came with a blizzard at its back. Eleanor woke to the sound of thunder, except thunder didn't come with snow. She realized with growing dread that it was hoofbeats, many of them, approaching fast through the pre-dawn darkness. "Jacob," she shook him awake. "They're coming." He was on his feet instantly, still weak but driven by urgency. Through the frosted window, they could see torches moving through the swirling snow, at least a dozen riders surrounding the cabin. "O'Rourke," Dwyer's voice cut through the wind. "Time's up. You can come out peaceful." or we can burn you out like rats." Eleanor grabbed the rifle while Jacob checked his revolver. Lester was already at his position by the back window, trembling but determined. "What do you want?" "Dwyer," Jacob called out. "You know what I want. The girl and that lying drunk. Hand them over, and you can walk away. This is your last chance." "Go to hell." Dwyer's laugh was ugly. "Have it your way, boys. Light it up." Fire arrows began arcing through the snow, thudding into the cabin walls. Most sputtered out in the wet wood, but some caught. Eleanor rushed to beat out the flames with a blanket while Jacob fired through the window, trying to drive the attackers back. "There's too many," Lester shouted, firing his old carbine. Eleanor's mind raced. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and the cabin wouldn't protect them for long. Then she remembered something: the river. It was close, and the high banks might provide cover. "The river," she told Jacob. "If we can reach the river." "Too far! They'll cut us down!" "Not if we create a distraction." She grabbed the lamp oil. "Remember what you taught me about controlling fires?" Understanding dawned in Jacob's eyes. "You beautiful genius. Lester, get ready to run." Eleanor splashed oil across the floor near the front wall, creating a barrier. When the next fire arrow hit, instead of fighting it, she let it catch the oil. Flames roared up, creating a wall of fire between them and the front attackers. Now, Jacob grabbed Eleanor's hand, and they burst out the back door into the blizzard. The snow was both enemy and ally. It slowed them down, but also provided cover. They ran toward the river, Lester struggling behind them. Shouts erupted as Dwyer's men realized what was happening. There, by the cottonwoods, gunfire cracked through the air. Eleanor felt a bullet whistle past her ear. Jacob turned and fired back, his shots careful and deliberate despite their desperate flight. They slid down the riverbank just as more bullets peppered the snow where they'd been standing. The river was partially frozen. Treacherous ice floes grinding against each other in the current. "Follow the bank," Jacob ordered. "Stay low." They scrambled along the rocky shore, using the high banks as cover. Behind them, Dwyer's men had reached the river, but the steep banks made it hard for horses to follow. "Spread out," Dwyer shouted. "Find where they come up." Eleanor's skirts tangled in the rocks, tripping her. Jacob caught her arm, steadying her, but she could see the pain etched on his face. His wound had reopened, blood seeping through his coat. "You're hurt. I keep moving." They rounded a bend, and Eleanor's heart sank. The bank here was lower, climbable, but it also meant exposure. Worse, she could hear horses ahead. Dwyer had sent men to cut them off. "Trapped," Lester wheezed, clutching his chest. Jacob looked at the partially frozen river, then at Eleanor. "Can you swim?" In that, the water was black between the ice floes, promising death by cold if not drowning. "No choice." He reloaded his gun grimly. "I'll hold them off. You and Lester cross." "No," Eleanor grabbed his arm. "We stay together or not at all." "Eleanor." "I won't lose you, not like this." Their argument was cut short by riders appearing on both sides. Dwyer himself led the group upstream, his face twisted with fury in the gray dawn light. "Nowhere to run. Rourke," he called. "Throw down your guns." Jacob pushed Eleanor behind him, raising his weapon. "Let her go, Dwyer. This is between us." "She's a witness. Can't have her spreading lies about honest businessmen." Dwyer's smile was sharp. "Besides, she'll fetch a good price in Mexico. Pretty white girl like that." The casual evil of it, the reduction of her to commodity again, sparked something in Eleanor. Not fear this time, but rage pure. Clean rage that burned away everything else. "You killed them," she said, stepping out from behind Jacob. "My family. You planned that robbery." Dwyer's men shifted uneasily. even among outlaws. Killing women and children was considered beyond the pale. Prove it, Dwyer sneered, but there was wariness in his eyes now. Your ring, Eleanor pointed. The red stone. You wore it during the robbery. Lester saw you. The word of a drunk and a desperate girl. That's your evidence. There's more. This came from an unexpected source, Tom Hutchins, riding up with a group of townsmen. Found something interesting in your safe. Dwyer, when the sheriff's away, people get curious. Dwyer went white. You broke into my office? Citizens, arrest, Hutchins said calmly. For murder, robbery, and about a dozen other crimes. He held up a leather journal. You really should have burned this. Names, dates, shares of profits, including the westbound express job that killed the Grace family. The transformation in Dwyer was instant. The civilized mask fell away, revealing the cornered animal beneath. He went for his gun, fast as a striking snake. But Jacob was faster. His shot took Dwyer center mass, spinning him around. Dwyer's gun flew from his hand, landing in the snow. No! Dwyer clawed toward his weapon, leaving a red trail. It's not supposed to. Eleanor moved without thinking. She kicked the gun away, then knelt beside the dying man, not from compassion, but from the need to look into the eyes of the man who'd destroyed her world. My parents, she said quietly. My 12-year-old brother. Did you even know their names? Dwyer coughed blood. Just business. James, Eleanor said. My brother's name was James. He wanted to be a doctor. My mother was Sarah. She made the best apple pie in 3 counties. My father was Thomas. He read to us every night, even when he was bone-tired from farming. Dwyer's eyes were glazing. I'm cold. Good. Eleanor stood, turning her back on him. May you carry that cold into eternity. The aftermath was swift. Dwyer's men, seeing their leader fall and faced with armed townsmen, scattered like quail. Some would be caught. Others would disappear into the frontier's vast emptiness. But their reign of terror was over. You all right? Jacob asked Eleanor, pulling her close. She leaned into him, suddenly exhausted. It's finished. No, he corrected gently. Now it begins. Our life, without shadows hanging over it. Hutchins approached, tipping his hat. Miss Grace, Rourke, town owes you an apology. We let fear and gossip blind us to what was really happening. Just glad it's over, Jacob said. There'll be an inquest, of course, but with Dwyer's journal and Lester's testimony, should be just a formality. Hutchins paused. Welcome to the community, both of you, properly this time. As the sun broke through the clouds, they made their way back to what was left of their cabin. The front was charred but salvageable. Eleanor's controlled fire had actually prevented total destruction. We'll rebuild, Jacob said, surveying the damage. Better than before. We will, Eleanor agreed. Then, softer. Did you mean it about marriage? Jacob turned to her, his face serious despite the chaos around them. He went down on one knee right there in the snow and ash. Eleanor Grace, you've been my salvation. You brought life back to this place and to me. I'm not rich, I'm not fancy, and I've got more scars than qualities. But I love you with everything I have. Will you marry me? Through tears, Eleanor saw not the damaged cabin or the harsh landscape, but home. She saw the man who'd bought her freedom, who'd given her dignity when the world tried to strip it away, who'd stood between her and danger time and again. Yes, she said simply. Yes, Jacob Rourke, I'll marry you. He stood and kissed her, there in the ruins of their battle, with snow falling softly around them. Lester whooped weakly from where he sat on a log, and even the townsmen smiled. When? Jacob asked when they parted. As soon as you can stand through a ceremony without falling over, Eleanor teased. A woman, I'd crawl to the altar if need be. Eleanor laughed, the sound bright and free in the morning air. For the first time since that terrible night on the train, she felt truly unburdened. The past would always be with her, but it no longer defined her future. They spent the rest of the day accepting help from neighbors suddenly eager to make amends. Food, supplies, and offers of labor poured in. The community that had once shunned Eleanor now embraced her as one of their own, proven in fire, tested in courage. That evening, as they sat in their partially repaired cabin, Jacob pulled Eleanor close. No more sleeping in the barn, he said. You'll stay here. Proper or not, I'm not letting you out of my sight. Scandal, Eleanor murmured, but she was smiling. Let them talk. We'll be married within the week anyway. Outside, the Wyoming wind howled its endless song, but inside there was warmth, safety, and love. The virgin who had shivered by the river had found her strength, and the lonely rancher had found his heart. Together, they'd faced down evil and won. Now came the harder task, building a life worth living, but looking at each other in the firelight, hands entwined. They knew they were ready for whatever came next. The river still ran dark and cold outside their door, carrying its memories downstream, but it also carried hope now, and the promise of spring to come. Spring came late to Wyoming that year, but when it arrived, it transformed the valley into something close to paradise. The snow melted, revealing green grass that seemed impossibly bright after the long winter. Wildflowers dotted the hillsides, Indian paintbrush, lupine, and prairie roses as if the earth itself was celebrating. Eleanor stood on the porch of their rebuilt cabin, now properly expanded with a second room and real glass windows. Her hand rested on her slightly rounded belly, feeling the flutter of new life within. 6 months married, and the ranch had transformed as much as she had. You shouldn't be lifting that, Jacob called out, seeing her reach for the water bucket. I'm carrying a child, not made of spun glass, she replied, but she let him take the bucket anyway. Smiling at his protective hovering, the barn stood tall and strong, better constructed than before. They'd held a barn raising in February, the whole community turning out to help, even Mrs. Henderson had come, bringing a quilt she'd made as a wedding gift and a tearful apology for her earlier coldness. I was wrong about you, child, the older woman had said. Fear makes fools of us all. Now the ranch bustled with life. They'd expanded the herd, added a proper chicken coop, and Eleanor's garden promised a good harvest. Lester still lived in the line shack but came down most days to help, his testimony at the inquest having cleared Eleanor's name completely. Letter came, Jacob said, producing an envelope from town. From Illinois. Eleanor's hands trembled as she recognized the handwriting. Her aunt, her mother's sister, who she'd written to months ago. She opened it carefully, Jacob's steady presence beside her. My dearest Eleanor, she read aloud. Words cannot express our joy at learning you survived that terrible night. We mourned you with the rest of the family, thinking all was lost. Your cousins speak of nothing but their brave cousin Eleanor who tamed the Wild West. The letter went on, full of family news and invitation to visit. Eleanor wiped her eyes, folding it carefully. I have family again, she whispered. You have more than that, Jacob said, pulling her close. You have a home, a husband who adores you, and soon a little one to carry on the Grace name. The Rourke name, she corrected. Eleanor Rourke has a nice sound to it. They stood together, watching the sun paint the mountains gold. The river ran high with snowmelt, no longer a reminder of tragedy but of survival, of that first moment when his hands had warmed hers and everything changed. Do you ever regret it? Eleanor asked suddenly. Your quiet life, disrupted by all my chaos. Jacob turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. Every morning I wake up to your face. Every evening I fall asleep to your breathing, and I thank God for whatever twist of fate brought you to me. Regret woman, you saved me. I was just existing before you came. She kissed him then, long and sweet, tasting the promise of all their tomorrows. When they parted, she noticed a rider approaching Tom Hutchins, now a friend rather than a threat. "Morning, folks," he called out. "Brought news from town. They're talking about making Jacob here sheriff. Town needs a man who'll stand up to troublemakers." Jacob shook his head. "I'm a rancher, not a lawman." "Think about it," Hutchins urged. "Good pay, respect, and Lord knows we need someone honest wearing that star." After he left, Eleanor studied her husband. "You're considering it?" "Maybe. With a child coming. Extra income wouldn't hurt, and maybe it's time I stopped hiding from the world." He touched her face gently. "You taught me that." That evening, as they prepared supper together, a simple stew, but seasoned with herbs from Eleanor's garden, she felt the baby kick strongly. "Oh!" She grabbed Jacob's hand, placing it on her belly. "Feel that." His face transformed with wonder as he felt the movement. "Strong little thing. Like the father," Eleanor said. "What shall we name him?" "Her," Jacob corrected with a smile. "And we'll name her Sarah, after your mother." "And if it's a boy?" "Thomas James, for your father and brother." Eleanor blinked back tears. Even now, his thoughtfulness could surprise her. This rough, quiet man who'd seen so much death understood the importance of keeping memory alive. As night fell, they sat by the fire, Jacob reading aloud from a book of poetry Eleanor had mail-ordered. His voice, usually gruff, softened with the words, "I have spread my dreams under your feet. Tread softly because you tread on my dreams." "That's beautiful," Eleanor murmured, drowsy with contentment. "You're beautiful," he replied, setting the book aside. "Sometimes I can't believe you're real." "I'm real," she assured him. "Real as the dirt under my nails and the life growing inside me. Real as this ranch and our love. We built something true here. Jacob, something that will last." The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows, but the cabin stood strong. In the barn, the horses were secure. In the line shack, Lester slept peacefully, his demons quieted by purpose and belonging. And in the cabin, two people who'd found each other across tragedy and trial settled in for another night together. "Tell me about tomorrow," Eleanor said, their old game from the dark days. "Tomorrow, I'll fix the gate on the north pasture." Jacob began. "You'll work in your garden. Probably sing to the plants like you think I don't notice. We'll have lunch by the river, the spot where you first smiled at me properly. In the evening, maybe we'll ride to town. Let folks see how happy Mrs. Rourke looks these days. And the day after, more of the same. God willing, day after day of ordinary miracles. Watching you grow round with our child, building this place up, growing old together." He kissed her forehead. "That's all I want. Eleanor, just this. This is everything," she agreed. As they prepared for bed, Eleanor paused by the window. The stars were brilliant in the clear Wyoming sky, and the river sang its eternal song. Somewhere out there were dangers still rustlers, harsh weather, all the challenges of frontier life. But here, in this moment, there was peace. She thought of that frightened girl on the auction block. How impossible this future would have seemed. She thought of her parents and James, hoping they could see her now not just survived, but thriving. She touched her belly, feeling the future kick beneath her hand. "What are you thinking?" Jacob asked from the bed. "That every hardship led me here," she said, joining him. "That maybe it was all worth it, to find this." He pulled her close, her back against his chest, his hand protective over their child. "You're worth everything, Eleanor Rourke, everything." Sleep came easily now, without the nightmares that had once plagued them both. The virgin who had shivered by the river had become a woman of strength and purpose. The lonely rancher had become a husband and soon-to-be father. Together, they'd faced down evil and chosen love. Spring had come to Wyoming, and with it, new life in all its forms. The ranch prospered, the community had accepted them, and their love grew deeper with each passing day. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. Life was still hard. Challenges still came, but they faced them together. Hands joined, hearts united. By the river where it all began, wildflowers bloomed around the stones. The water ran clear and cold, carrying no more memories of blood and loss, only the promise of renewal. And in a small cabin on the Wyoming frontier, two people proved that sometimes, against all odds, love could triumph over tragedy, hope over despair. The West was still wild, but they had tamed their corner of it with courage, faith, and the warmth of hands touching in the cold. Their story would be told in years to come, how a auction turned to rescue, rescue to love, and love to a life worth living. But for now, they simply lived it, day by precious day, building their tomorrow on the ashes of yesterday, proof that even in the harshest land, the human heart could bloom. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope Eleanor and Jacob's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine in the telling. I'd love to hear where you're listening from, whether it's a bustling city or quiet countryside. Leave a comment and let me know. Share your thoughts about their story and what moments resonated with you. If you enjoyed this tale of love conquering adversity in the American frontier, please subscribe to Wild West Night for more stories that capture the spirit of the Old West. Don't forget to like this video and hit the hype button to help more listeners discover Eleanor and Jacob's unforgettable romance. Until next time, partners,